Animals are driven by emotion. They get hungry, they eat. They get scared, they run. They get horny, well, you get the picture. But we humans are different, so I'm told. We have critical thinking skills. Although one would be hard pressed to believe it given recent events. People get angry, they protest, they riot, they burn, and they loot. Of course, I'm referring to the death of George Floyd and the ensuing reaction, and perhaps it's entirely justifiable. But perhaps not. So, how about putting emotion aside for just a few minutes to consider some factual information and use those critical thinking skills of yours instead of being led around by emotion? So, to start with, every year the police make more than 12 million arrests in the USA. Now, how many of those arrests do you suppose result in the death of an unarmed black person? Go ahead, take your best guess. 100? 200? 2,000? No. Last year, the number was 9. Who says so? Must be some right-wing extremist group, or the police themselves, or Breitbart, or the KKK. Nope. That figure is from the very liberal Washington Post, who has maintained a database of all police killings since 2015. And the number of unarmed victims is going down, not up. In 2017, police killed 21 unarmed black men. And in 2015, when Obama was president, they killed 38. Yes, that's right. Police killings of unarmed black people have gone down during Trump's presidency. Way down. Though you'd never guess it from media coverage. And what about white people? Well, last year police killed 19 unarmed whites. That's right. Police killed twice as many whites as blacks. Unarmed ones, that is. And you may find this hard to believe, but in 2019, the chances of being unarmed, arrested, and then killed by the police were slightly higher for whites than for blacks. 1 out of 292,000 arrests for blacks, and 1 out of 283,000 for whites. But what about people who are armed? As you can see here, police kill about 1,000 people total each year, and about 25% of them are black. Now, since blacks are only 13% of the population, that is almost twice as often proportionally. So is that proof of police racism? Probably not, because most of the population never comes into contact with the police. So it is a percentage of criminals, not population, that counts. And what are those percentages? In 2018, blacks accounted for 37% of arrests for all violent crimes, 54% of arrests for robbery, and 53% of arrests for murder. So to prove police bias, we should see higher percentages of deaths than arrests, but we don't. Blacks account for 37% of all arrests, but only 25% of deaths while in custody. Blacks die less often than whites while in custody. If that is racism, then it is flowing in the entirely opposite direction from what we are so often told. Here's another stat. According to FBI data, between 120 to 150 police officers are killed each year, and about 35% of the killers are black. So blacks, who are 13% of the population, account for nearly 3 times that ratio of police killings. But since nearly all of those killings are carried out by black men, then the 35% of cop killings are carried out by just 6.5% of the population. Now, with this information in mind, is it any wonder that some police might be a little on edge when dealing with black criminals? Now, some might argue that blacks are arrested more in the first place because the cops are racist and they're targeting them, and that is why their crime stats are so high. Well, it's an interesting idea, but every year, the Bureau of Justice Statistics does a crime victimization survey where they conduct almost 250,000 interviews among hundreds of thousands of people of a representative sample of the population, where they ask people if they've been a victim of a crime. And many of these crimes were not even reported to the police. And when it comes to race, the survey data matches almost identically with the police data. The American public reports that half of robbers were black, and police arrests for robbery turn out to be almost half black. So the police are doing what they're supposed to do, arresting criminals without regard to race. There have been scientific studies as well. This paper, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, probably the most prestigious peer-reviewed journal in the country, found that, and I quote, "No evidence of anti-black or anti-Hispanic bias across police shootings, and white officers are not more likely to shoot minority civilians than non-white officers." Well, there you have it. You believe in science, right? What now? You think whoever did this study was a white supremacist or something? All right. Consider the work of black economist from Harvard, Roland Fryer. He was angry after the deaths of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray, so he did his own research. After carefully studying 1,238 police shootings in 10 big city police departments, when he compared the circumstance of each killing, he too could find no evidence of police bias. If anything, police were more likely to shoot a non-threatening white than a non-threatening black person. Fryer said it was the most surprising research result of his career. Well, why did Roland Fryer find it surprising? And for that matter, why do you find it so surprising? Well, just like all the people out in the streets protesting right now, he believed everything he was shown on TV, told by authority, even educated in. He thought it was the sum total of reality. But it isn't. It's a carefully crafted story, a kind of self-inflicted delusion. Consider this recent, very long article in the New York Times titled, "Minneapolis Police Use Force Against Black People at 7 times the Rate of Whites." Wow, that seems to disprove everything I just said, doesn't it? But it doesn't. It's a delusion. And I'm going to tell you why. This article does not say one word about differences in crime rates or arrest rates in Minneapolis. This would be like writing that police are 7 times more likely to use force against men than women, and concluding, therefore, that the police are sexist. But of course, men commit crimes at much higher rates than women. So it is male behavior, not police bias, that accounts for the difference. And what was the actual situation in Minneapolis? According to the Minneapolis Police Department, blacks were 10 times more likely than whites to be a suspect, and 6 times more likely to be arrested. So if police are using force 7 times more often with blacks, the difference is very small. But the New York Times did not report a very small difference, did they? Now, I don't question the New York Times' honesty. I believe that they really believe they are reporting the truth, just as everyone who reads their articles believes it as well. They get the answer they're hoping for and simply stop looking or stop thinking. Now, the reasonable conclusion, the non-emotional conclusion, is that police are reacting to behavior, not skin tone. And that the racist police hypothesis is, if not entirely, then almost complete baloney. So what's the point of all this? Is this to excuse the behavior of the police in the arrest of George Floyd? No, it is not. Is it to perpetuate some sort of stereotypes and prejudice against anyone? No, it is not. Violent criminals are a small minority among all groups, black, white, or otherwise. And most people are just fine and should be treated as such, unless proven otherwise. The point of this is that I would like to move towards a solution where incidents, like what happened to George Floyd, are held to an absolute minimum. Wouldn't we all? That guy did not deserve to die for allegedly buying a pack of cigarettes with a counterfeit bill. No way. The officer in question is almost certainly guilty of manslaughter, and I hope he's convicted of the same. But if we want to solve the problem, really solve the problem, not just shout and protest and post how righteous we are on Facebook, then we first need to accurately identify what the problem is. And if I've just been making the case for, that problem is not racism, or white supremacy, or COVID-19, or even Donald Trump. So what is the problem? Well, it's multifaceted, but here's the big part of it. Although most police are good guys trying to do the right thing, the job in itself attracts a certain number of power-crazy dickheads. I'm sure you've encountered one or two of them in your time. Well, steps ought to be taken to reduce the number of power-crazy dickheads from among the ranks of the police as much as possible, for the safety of us all, regardless of race. Now, I've got some ideas about how to achieve that, but this rant has already gone on long enough, so that's going to have to wait for another time. But let me conclude with this. As long as the reaction to these incidents remains emotional, outcries over racism, the longer such incidents will continue to happen. And unfortunately, I have a feeling that some of the people who push this bullshit narrative like it that way just fine. All the better to herd people around by their emotions. My only hope is that people will stop reacting like animals and start thinking like human beings. Or in other words, there's no hope at all. God help us. Peace out.